Hello, my name is Alanna Wilcox, and I am a little bit of everything. So to start off with, I guess the best way that you could describe me would be being a fiber artist and educator, but I'm also an author, an inventor, a community builder, an ADHD haver, a mischief maker, a creativity empower, a cat lover, a joy spreader, a fiber entrepreneur, and my pronouns are she and her. So thank you for taking the time to check out this video about myself and my work, and I hope that after you watch it, you'll leave a little bit more inspired and empowered to go on your own creative adventure. So in this video, I'm going to talk a little bit about my background and what led me to where I am today, my educator and artist philosophy, and how I approach both teaching and creating. I'll also let you know where you can connect with me if you're interested in continuing the conversation about creativity, art, and fiber. And I'll also share some of the services that I offer for students as well as for my artwork. So as far as where I got started, how I got started in the fiber arts, I would say that it goes way back to when I was a little girl. And my grandmother was into doing needlepoint, she would do knitting, crocheting, so she did a little bit of everything. And I grew up in Brooklyn with my mother, and my grandmother lived upstairs from us because we had a two-family home. And so I would go and hang out with my grandmother often when my mom was at work or if she was busy doing something. And so I would watch my grandmother, playing with yarn and doing things with yarn and thread, and I was really fascinated by it. And one of my earliest memories of loving working with thread and yarn was when we would go to these Italian bakeries in Brooklyn and we would leave and they would wrap the boxes in this baker string. So it's this like red and white cotton twine. And my favorite thing to do was to take it off the box and untangle it. And I just loved the tactile sensory input that touching yarn and thread would give me. And so the first thing that my grandmother taught me how to do was to crochet. And I never really followed a pattern or, did anything like that. It was more just the mechanics of how to do stitches. And so I would start off with basic stitches and get more complicated into making scarves and blankets. And then she also tried to teach me how to knit, but I wasn't having any of it in the beginning. And I also did embroidery with regards to like needlepoint and cross stitch. And so as I got older towards high school, I started to get more interested in doing more complicated, patterns and projects, and also trying to branch out and create fiber art things that were more my own unique creation as opposed to following patterns. And so when I was in college, I was taking a course on English literature, and the instructor brought in a crazy quilt. And as soon as I saw this crazy quilt, I was totally inspired to go and make my own, because now not only did I find something that incorporated threads and embroidery and beads and all of that, but now fabric was also involved. And so the idea of being able to use so many different elements and components in a crazy quilt really got me excited. And so I started this journey of making this crazy quilt that took me the better part of 20 years to finish. And as I would go to different places and spaces, I would collect different things to put on my quilt. And so I collected fabric and thread and beads from different places I would visit. If I were to go, on a vacation or something like that, I would go to whatever local shops there were that sold these different fiber related materials, and I would attach them to my quilt as a way of documenting these moments in my life. And so I had a rag doll, so this cat that I loved very dearly, his name was Oscar, and he was like my little buddy. And so every time I would create and make something, he was always hanging out with me and keeping me company. And I really wanted to be able to commemorate or memorialize him in my quilt. So I went to the local Spinners Guild to see if I could have his fur turned into yarn that I could use for embroidery thread. Well, when I got there, the members, of course, didn't want to spin the yarn for me. They wanted to teach me how to do it. So I signed up for a workshop. I learned how to use a drop spindle, and after that, I was completely hooked. Okay, so this over here is the quilt block that started it all as far as my love of spinning. So down over here, you can see there's like a little curled up cat that's sleeping. It's kind of bad because I wasn't really good at embroidery as far as making it look realistic at that point. Plus it's like super small. But that is my cat's fur that I was trying to spin to make embroidery thread for the quilt to incorporate him. So that was supposed to be Oscar, or who I affectionately refer to as Cat Manager. And this one just has lots of cool different types of embroidery stitches, beadwork. I have a star on it, so there's some really, I don't know, I think French knots are so pretty, and some glass seed beads. But yeah, this was the last block that I worked on, trying to get that embroidery thread out of my cat's fur. So there you go. And as a more experienced spinner now, looking at it, I can tell that it's underplied. See, so even in things that look this beautiful, as an artist, we always tend to be drawn to our mistakes and flaws, but I'm really happy nonetheless with how this block looks. Now, one of the members that was part of this guild, they were enrolled in this spinning study, and so basically it's this 6-year program where you can go over the summer for about 9 days, have this intense instruction, and then you go home, you have these homework assignments you have to complete, and like I said, it takes about 6 years. Each year is about 250 hours worth of time that gets invested into doing all of these homework assignments that you mail in, you get a grade, and then when you're done with all of that, you end up with what is called a spinning certificate. And so as a lover of learning and fiber, I just thought that that was the best thing ever, and I couldn't wait to sign up for this course. And so I went in, I think it was about 2007, I signed up for the level 1 spinning certificate course. And at the time I was teaching high school art. So I was doing it, over the summer when I wasn't teaching, and doing the homework assignments throughout the year. But while I was teaching, I was also learning how to spin. So I would say that both of those components or parts of my life, right, being the teacher and the fiber artist, were kind of happening simultaneously. And so each one informed the other. And so as I was going and learning about, spinning and dyeing and all of these things that related to the fiber arts, I was also teaching my students, and I was teaching them things like portraiture and perspective. And when we were doing a unit or a lesson on color mixing for portraiture, I was trying to think of how could I explain to my students the best way to mix colors together so that they could achieve skin tones. And so because all of the students were painting different people that had to mix different colors for the skin tones, there was no like one specific recipe, right, in order to make the skin tones. So I was looking up artists that we could use as an inspiration for color mixing and matching. And one of the artists that really, struck me and stood out was an artist by the name of Chuck Close. So if you're not familiar, Chuck Close is really famous for these larger than life portraits that have photorealistic detail in them. But what's even more amazing about these portraits is that they are larger than life. So some of them are, upwards of 9 feet tall. And so when you walk past them, they really grab your attention and your eye. But because they are so photorealistic, the color of the people that he's painting, their skin tones, is also very realistic as well. So as I was doing this research for my students on Chuck Close's color mixing technique, I began to see that he was mixing primary colors together, but they weren't what are referred to as the standard primary colors. So in school, when you're in elementary school, right, your teacher might tell you, okay, so if you mix the color blue and the color yellow, you're going to get green. But there's so many different versions and varieties of the color green. How do we even know what blue to start with and what yellow to start with? And that can be very daunting and very intimidating, right, for someone that's learning about color for the first time. So what I really enjoyed about Chuck Close's process was that he used the same colors or the same primaries that a color printer used, but he was very ahead of his time because he was creating these portraits even before color printers were around, back in the 60s and 70s. And so when I was trying to teach my students about color mixing, I realized that I could also go onto the computer and look up these pixels or parts of a picture that are part of a digital image, and it would show the ratio of the primary colors of the cyan, magenta, yellow, and black that a color printer uses. And so in this way, I was really inspired by the simplistic method of mixing 4 colors together to get a wide range of colors in a color palette, and also using that as a means to teach students about color theory, about color mixing, and really helping them hone in on how to mix colors for their portraits. Now, once I had this idea, right, as far as mixing paint, I started to kind of jump over to the other side of being an artist and thinking about, well, if I can do this with my students and mix colors in this fashion with paint, then why can't I also apply what I am doing with my students, right, in this color mixing to using dye? And so once I had that idea, I tried to test it out. So at the time, this was during my level 1 coursework, so the first year, and I went ahead and I tried to apply this philosophy and this approach to dyeing different colors from this picture over here of a sunset and applying it to a grease fleece of cormo. So I scoured and washed the fiber, and then I went and I dyed different clumps or chunks of this fleece, and then I went and I carded it or blended it together. I spun the fiber, and then I knitted up these gloves, and I modified another commercial pattern in order to make them a fingerless glove with a flap. And so I was so excited when I was able to figure out how to approach color mixing this way that I wrote my first book that was called Dyeing to Get the Colors You Want. And basically it's a guide that I have for people to help them use images, like digital images, to create color palettes and to really understand color theory on a slightly more advanced level than just yellow and blue makes green. And like I said, this was around 2008 when I created this dye guide. And so I started to experiment with other color combinations and using different primaries to see if I could really hone in and get these recipes or formulas so that pretty much anybody could start off with a given formula and match a color from a digital image or from a pixel. And so again, I was teaching at the time, right? So I continued my teaching career. But throughout that time of experimenting and having, failures and successes, I was also teaching at different fiber festivals as well. So outside of the classroom, right? Teaching in the high school, I was also beginning to teach spinning classes and dyeing workshops, in both the local community at fiber festivals. And so I got really frustrated with using the digital image as a reference because I couldn't quite figure out what the primary colors were that a printer used in relationship to dye, meaning I didn't know how strong of a concentration that magenta was in a Hewlett-Packard printer and the inks that they used, right? And also I did a lot of research on how a color is projected onto a screen. So if a camera, for example, goes and takes a picture of a sunset, the image is going to look very different when it's projected onto a screen. And you may have experienced that phenomenon when you see just a really gorgeous sunset and you try to take a picture and it doesn't quite look the same way on your phone or your computer as it did in person, right? Because the way that our eyes perceive color is very different than the way a camera can capture them. There's a limited range of colors that a camera can capture compared to what we as humans can see. And so there's this almost language translation that occurs. So you have the camera that's trying to capture what it quote unquote sees, right? So let's say that's going, and capturing something in the language of, Spanish. And then the camera is basically sending that information of what it captured to the computer monitor. And so the language that the computer monitor is going to speak in may be Dutch, for example. And then what the computer monitor speaks in with regards to color, the language then changes when it goes to the printer. And so I have a more in-depth lecture on this called Color, Fiber, and Dye. But basically the premise is that it keeps changing languages until when the printer prints the color, it may look very different than what was actually the color in real life. It's going to be similar, but there's going to be these variations and almost, language translations that occur throughout this process. So it can be very, very complicated. And while I was away teaching at one of these fiber festivals, my spinning workshop, so I was up in Twist in Quebec, and there was the photographer that was working the festival, taking pictures. He and I were talking about color, and both of us being color lovers. And so he was giving me some more information about how I could improve my color matching system. And so I took some of the advice that he had given me and I went and I applied it. I was using things like a light box and testing out different color combinations, and that led me to developing my color matching formulas. And so this has been a project in the past 15 years that I've been working on, trying to develop and hone in on. And so that really turned into this course that I've developed that is called Color Alchemy Masterclass. And so it's partly a course and it's partly this adventure, this experience that I'm trying to curate for people that are both fiber lovers, right? So you could be a spinner, a felter, but also a dyer, and really helping people improve their understanding and knowledge of color theory, but also the artistry of dyeing and working with color and creating color palettes. And so at the time of filming this video, I'm currently in the beta testing phase with participants on the course. And it also includes a copy of the book that I wrote called Color Alchemy, From Digital to Dye. And so they're helping me with fleshing out the remainder of what I really envision as being this guided color experience. And so I'm really excited to be able to launch this experience in January of 2023. And so if you're interested in learning more about it, please feel free to reach out and let me know, and I can give you more information on that. But in the interim of working on the book and the course and all of that, I created these formulas for people to be able to use. So if somebody tells me what color that they would like to match that is a digital color, so in computer terms that is referred to as a hex color code. So that's the language that a computer monitor uses when they are analyzing a color. So they won't call it red or red-orange. They'll give it a number, right? And so this number I can then convert into a dye formula, and I can tell people what brands of dyes they need, what amounts they need it in, and all of that information for a specific weight of fiber, and then they can achieve these color matches. So in addition to these color formulas, I also really love to be able to support the fiber art community by working with indie dyers and other fiber artists to really help bring their visions of their color collections and all of that to life. So this facet of my business began to grow. So not only did I create these color formulas, but now I also offer consultation services to people really looking to fine tune and improve their color sense, their understanding of color theory, as well as dye applications. So as this business of mine began to grow, and as I began to do more research and teach more, I really was getting very excited about all of the different opportunities that were, being presented, and just like this over here, to be able to be an artist, to share my story and my experience with you. And it was always my lifelong dream to be a fiber artist. And so when I was applying to go to college and trying to decide what major and what college to go to, I was told, that I couldn't be an artist because I would never be able to make a living doing it. So I had to pick something different. And so, I really enjoyed sharing my love and my passion about art and about creating with other people. So I just felt that going into art education seemed like a natural, progression or extension of my personality and what I love to do. And so I was working in, like I said, I was a high school teacher for the past 16 years. But when COVID, came about in 2019, and teachers had to teach remotely from home, I really began to feel like I was in my element. So I know some people had a really challenging time with, dealing with COVID and that isolation and all of the challenges that came with it. However, as an introvert, I really thrived in this environment of teaching from home. I loved the challenge of how does one teach art with no art materials, right? How do I get students to exercise their creativity muscles without having those materials? And so I really loved that experience of trying to kind of think outside the box, be more creative. And I realized like one of my artistic or creative inspiration, like one of my artist heroes, his name is Phil Hansen. And one of the things that he often talks about in his work is how putting a limitation on yourself can actually drive your creativity. And so I really tried to embrace that philosophy with my students. And I really just loved being able to teach at home. But I was also teaching workshops at home too. I was teaching online. And I really thought, you know what, I might be able to have a go at this full time. So I took a year off from teaching in the public school, and I really tried to see if I could make this a full-time career. So for the past year, that's what I've been doing, trying to teach more in-person workshops, trying to develop this course on dyeing and color matching and this color experience as I've discussed before. And now I'm at this point where I'm ready to make the transition to leave the classroom to pursue being a fiber artist and instructor full-time. Now, it can be very scary when you have these hopes and these dreams, right? But you're often hearing voices in your head telling you that you can't do something. And it's not just with living your dream and your passion, but it can also be with creativity, right? Sometimes when we're approaching creating something, anything really, we might have voices in our head telling us, oh, you're not talented enough, you're not creative enough, you can't do it. And so I don't think those voices are necessarily our own inner voice, but it's the voices that we might develop when we hear other people talking to us, right? Or when we hear people criticizing or critiquing our work. And so one of the things that I like to use whenever I'm teaching people about how to be creative, because again, I'm an art teacher and I don't believe that students just magically show up in front of me already talented, right? My job as an educator is to be able to empower people and to give them the skills and the tools necessary to create on their own. So I don't believe in having people copy what I'm doing as far as this step-by-step formulaic way of approaching creativity. Instead, I like to give people different options to explore and find the path that works best for them. So in my classroom, when you would first walk in, there was a sign that I had posted up on the wall that said, if you say you can't, you won't. But if you say you'll try, you'll be amazed at what you can accomplish. And so as an educator, I really felt it was very important that not only do I have these inspirational quotes and things like that around my room, but also that I model for students what does it look like when you're going outside of your comfort zone and doing something that maybe you don't have a lot of confidence yet with. And really what the difference is between myself and anyone else that's starting to do something for the first time is that I've made a lot more mistakes, but I didn't allow them to be the things that stopped me from continuing to try, right? And so another analogy that I use with students and participants in my classes is that part of the learning that we experience, right, the path of learning how to do something new is we have to make mistakes. It is so important that we make mistakes because these, quote unquote mistakes are the things that are going to guide us and let us know what we do like and what we don't like. And so I often will tell people, pretty much everyone, I'd like to think, maybe it's not 100% universal, but mostly everybody has had the experience of burning toast. And so as an artist, right, we may do a drawing or a painting or knit a project or something that we really don't like. We try, we get frustrated, and we fail. But it's just like burnt toast, okay? So if we look at the burnt toast as the worst thing that ever happened and I never want to burn toast again, then that can really shut us off from all of these wonderful culinary cooking experiences that we may have. But if we see that cooking toast is part of what we need to do, we have to burn the toast in order to level up, so to speak, it's going to change our perception of the creative process, right? And so we can do things to modify the way the toast came out. So we can change the temperature of the toaster. We can change how long the bread is in the toaster for. We can do things to modify what we did to get different outcomes and different results. But there also might be people like myself, so maybe not you, but definitely like me, that actually enjoy eating burnt toast. And so if I go to a restaurant and I say to them, can you make it burnt? Oftentimes it'll come back a tan brown. And I'll be like, no, 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 I want it black, I want it like charred and black. And so, each one of us might have what we consider to be, correct versus a mistake, right? And so if someone thought that burning toast was a mistake, for me, I think it's a mistake if it's undercooked, right? So we can have these different approaches to creating where I might be someone that likes to follow a pattern. And if I don't do exactly what the designer said to do in the pattern, that's it. All bets are off. It's ruined. It can't be fixed. But if you're someone that approaches making that mistake as par for the course, then the overall creation process is going to transform and it's going to look very different. So again, speaking to this idea of if you say you can't do something, you're not going to do it, right? So if I say I can't make toast because I'm going to burn it, then basically I'm like getting rid of that first part, and it's just saying like, I can't do this. And even though I found a reason why I can't do it, I'm giving myself permission to fail. I'm giving myself permission to not be successful and to just avoid it completely. But if we kind of change that narrative, right? And if we say to ourselves, okay, I can't make toast yet, but I'm going to keep practicing. I'm going to keep trying until I'm going to be successful at it, or until I'm going to get results that I'm really happy with. Or I'm going to take classes to learn how to make toast so that I can be more successful. And so adding on to that sentence or to that statement is going to really change the outcome of what happens. It's going to change the outcome of where we invest our energy and our time and the results that we're going to get. And so as a teacher, again, I feel like it's really important for myself to model for the participants and the students in my classes that it's okay to take risks, right? It's okay to play, to experiment, to make mistakes. And in that spectrum of playing and creating and making mistakes, that's where growth happens. And so even when I was studying about color and learning about color and felt like I had a really strong grasp and understanding of color, there were still things that felt like they were out of my grasp, out of my realm of understanding. And so it was really important that I talked to other people to get their insights and their expertise. And once I did that, I was able to continue the growth that I had as both an artist and a creator and a teacher as well. And so when you're going through creating whatever projects it is that you do. So if you're a knitter, a weaver, if you're a dyer, whatever you enjoy creating, you know that you got to the level of skill that you're at because you've made mistakes, right? So if you're a knitter, I'm sure if you've attempted lace, you've made a mistake doing that. And only when you make a mistake with knitting do you learn about, these things called lifelines, right? So most of the time, a knitter is not going to use a lifeline. So it's like basically a save, if you will, right, for knitters. So you won't use a lifeline unless you've made the mistake and then you're like, oh, wait a second. Okay, now I know what a lifeline is and I need to use it, right? So it's just like if you're making toast, you may not know about changing the temperature dial because maybe you've never burnt toast before. But if you go to a novel situation like someone else's house to make toast, their toaster might be different. And then you may have to experiment and see what works for you. But I often think times that when people come into the creative process and space, they often are used to following step-by-step instructions on how to create something. So if you think, for example, of a knitting pattern, the designer of the pattern will tell you what needles to use, what yarn to use, how many stitches, but there's nothing really in the pattern that says, and if you want to go off and do your own thing, all the more power to you, right? It's like, these are the instructions, this is what you have to follow. And so oftentimes when people are following those patterns, there's a little bit of a hesitation or a reluctance to go and modify the pattern to their liking or to even have the skill set to know how to approach doing that. And so I encourage you to try to put a limitation on yourself, like how I said Phil Hansen was this artist that really helped me with that concept of if you put a limitation on what you're creating, right, it's going to change the outcome of what's possible. And so for myself, when I'm making projects, even if I'm using a design or a pattern that another designer used, I like to ask questions and have the question asking guide the creative process. So what that might look like, for example, in this project here, I've created this shawl that the design is from Stephen West, and the different elements and color components of it, though, are my own ideas. And so I tried to think of the movie and the story, The Wizard of Oz. And as I was creating each of the different sections, I tried to interpret and think about what would the different characters and the different scenes from the story look like. So I tried to imagine what kind of yarns and textures and fibers would I have to combine together to make a yarn that resembled Toto and a Cairn Terrier, right? So to get that kind of like fuzzy, wiry texture. And so even though I'm a spinner, when I was creating these yarns, I also thought, oh, this might be fun to use yarns that are already made, so using commercial yarns. And then I also had yarns in it that I dyed, like in the rainbow section of the Somewhere Over the Rainbow, all of those colorful yarns were ones that I dyed. And so as I went through each section, I was really trying to have the creative process of building these yarns and constructing these yarns be guided by the question of what elements or components would this character or this scene have in order for that to be communicated or come across in the piece. And so the next sequence is the ruby slippers from the Wicked Witch of the East, and that was super fun to spin 100% Angelina fiber. So it's this synthetic sort of metallic-y tinsel, like plasticky tinsel type of fiber. And for the most part, I've never seen anybody spin 100% Angelina fiber, but I really wanted to capture the sparkle and twinkle of the ruby slippers. And so again, having this idea guide the creative process allowed me to experiment and explore with different techniques and approaches. Even though I was making yarn, it was still yarn that was guided by my creativity and my imagination, as opposed to following some type of formula that someone developed, in this like step-by-step way. And I really had a lot of fun developing the scarecrow yarn. So I was experimenting with different types of straw inclusions and how could I create that effect and look by ripping up ribbons and having that torn fabric effect. Then when I did the Yellow Brick Road, I had some yarns that I mixed together to kind of give it like a cobbled surface texture. And the Tin Man, I went and I put in some copper beads to give it the element of rust. And the lion section is awesome because it was yarn that I dyed and I made a mistake in it. And so I thought that it required courage to be able to use a yarn that had a quote unquote mistake, right? Or my burnt toast yarn. And as I kept going through the design process, I was getting more and more excited. So the next section was the Field of Poppies. But then I was trying to think, how could I create a flying monkey? And so I had a lot of fun with this, as well as my cat Glenn, who really enjoyed chewing on the feathers. So I had to keep them moved away from him. But you can see that I was playing around with different types of ways of incorporating feathers and fabric in my yarns. And so this idea of a limitation placed on my creative process really started to make this whole project come together in a very unique and creative way, but it was fun. And I was playing, and there was no right way or wrong way to interpret the movie or to interpret the characters. And it really just lent itself to a really exciting project to work through because each part and component became something different and something novel. And so when I'm teaching my workshops and my classes to people, I really try to encourage them to just try to think outside the box and to know, yes, I'm wearing the title or the hat that says teacher, right? But really, I'm just, like I said, somebody that made a little bit more mistakes. I've burnt more toast, but I never let that burnt toast stop me. And so there was a lot of mistakes that I made prior to this shawl. So one of the first projects that I did was spinning for socks. And I like to refer to them as my potholder socks because the yarn is so dense and so thick that it just doesn't work for a pair of socks, for me and what I prefer, right? So it's like too undercooked toast. Then I tried another pair of socks, but this time using cotton. And I like to refer to these socks as my self-destruct socks because they have a strand of this really tough, wearing yarn that's nylon, right? And it's next to a very softly spun cotton so that if the strong nylon is going to rub against the soft cotton, it's basically going to act like a saw and cut the fibers. So I do try to save all of these quote unquote mistakes so that people could really see I'm really being very sincere and genuine when I tell you that I've made these mistakes. But I didn't stop there. I didn't allow those socks to be the only socks that I ever made. So I went on to make other socks, and I went on to experiment and explore with what is the difference between a 3-ply sock for my spinners that is a chain-plied version versus using 3 bobbins. I experimented with different ways of dyeing the fiber and carding it and blending it. So now that I've moved past making those mistakes and I've tried to modify what I've done, now I'm feeling more and more confident, right? Because I'm able to make choices that are kind of honing in and really getting what I'm envisioning in my head to come out in the fiber and the projects that I work on. So that was a little bit about the teacher side, but as an artist, the things that I really get inspired by and excited by for sure are color. And I love to match colors, to pair colors together, to come up with interesting color combinations, and try to think about ways, how can I communicate an idea that I have in whatever it is that I'm creating by using the elements of color and texture. And so again, using the principle of playing and question asking, I allow that to guide the process of my art creation. But to me, again, as an educator, I was always trying to think of how can I explain to my students what art is without having them copy me, right? And so one of the topics or the ideas that I would love to start the year off with was, what is the difference between art versus craft? And I know that this can be a very challenging question to pose to people, because people are going to have their own opinions and thoughts on it. So I really try to let my students know that this is just my own personal approach or thinking about art, and so you might have a different way of seeing it or thinking about it, and that's okay, but this is just mine. So my philosophy in the creation of art is that, to me, craft is the skill that you develop as an artist, right? So if you are a crafts person, or if you're if you're someone that has a high level of craftsmanship, that means that you know how to execute a specific set of skills to create something. So for example, I could be a tailor that could make, an amazing wedding gown, but I'm following a pattern, okay? So the pattern itself, right, the design of it doesn't require any creativity or any contribution on as far as like that idea or that aspect, if the tailor is going to follow it to a T, right? So the pattern said to use this fabric, they use that fabric. They said to do these stitches, they use those stitches. But it's when the creator, right, of this dress or this tailor then goes beyond, right, just the skill execution, but tries to pair the what they're doing with their hands and the creation piece with an idea, with an emotion, with a message that they're trying to communicate. And to me, when you then have that component built in, then that's when it becomes art. So if the tailor, for example, wanted to, make a different message or have a different idea that's communicated, right? So for example, a knitter, okay? So you can follow a knitting pattern for a scarf and just use all the yarn and all of that. But what happens if the knitter then tries to change the idea or the message or the emotion that's being communicated? Instead of using yarn, what if they made a scarf using barbed wire? And how would the wearer of that scarf feel, react, respond? How would the viewer of seeing someone having that barbed wire scarf on, respond to it, right? And so in having that kind of switch, that idea or that message switched because of the material that got switched, all of a sudden it takes on something new, something novel, but it's also an expression of that person. And so to me, that is when you have a really powerful piece of art, when you have someone that has a high level of skill or the craftsmanship piece, right? And they're pairing that with a really strong and powerful idea or message or emotion that they're trying to communicate. And so as an artist, I'm really happy that I've made so many mistakes in my life, because I feel like right now I'm at a place where my skills are such that I can execute whatever I'm imagining. So the craftsmanship level is high, but I'm having a lot of fun exploring different ideas and concepts and how to communicate them. So in one of the most recent pieces that I've created, I was trying to learn more about the world of NFTs and what that means. So for those of you that aren't familiar with that, an NFT stands for a non-fungible or fungible, I don't even know how to pronounce it, token. And basically it's a contract, right? Or like a receipt. So if you go to the store and you buy, let's say a book, for example, you're going to get a receipt that is evidence of you purchasing it. But within the NFT space, right, and within that type of artwork, it still counts as a receipt, but then you can sell the artwork, and then that receipt and the history of that artwork will follow it. And so the whole concept of NFTs is really interesting too, because there are some that have a negative impact on the environment. And so there's a big debate about should people be using them or not. Then there are ones that are more environmentally friendly. So there's a lot of controversy and novelty about this format of creating art. And so I'm really interested in trying to go down the more environmentally friendly path of it, but trying to think about how can I infuse the fiber arts and what I do into this digital type of technique space, right? And so the last project that I worked on was I was doing research and learning about what NFTs were. And in doing my research, I saw or heard about this style of art called glitch art. So if you're not familiar with it, it's basically artwork that will resemble, like if you've ever put in an old VHS and it has, the picture isn't quite in focus and things are breaking up, or in a video game, right? If it's glitching, it has like all these pixels and the image isn't really clear. And so I was really super excited by seeing this type of artwork. So I reached out to an artist and I said, hey, can I use your glitch artwork as inspiration for trying to turn it into a fiber art piece? And so they said, sure, go for it. So I tried to imagine, like, how could I, using different textures and yarns and colors and applications, I used felting and embroidery, and I basically put this piece together. And what I loved about it the most, though, is that it also captures my sense of humor that I love to have in my pieces as well. So because the glitch art piece that I was trying to copy, it had an element of, it was a video, right? So there was like moving pieces and parts to it. And so I was trying to think, like, how could I get my fiber to do that as well? And so I just started, laughing so hard to myself when I thought, okay, I'm going to take a hair dryer and I'm going to hold some yarns and I'm going to blow it over the piece, and it's going to give it that, pixelated glitching effect. The other component as far as my work and my process is that I have ADHD, and I was diagnosed later in life. And so why I think that's important is because for me, the act of creating with fiber, as I said, with going back to the bakery string, is that it really has this tactile sensory input to my fingers, and I find that often will calm my mind, and it'll just get me in a place where it's almost like a form of meditation. And so I've used the fiber arts, not unknowingly, as almost a coping mechanism to deal with things like social anxiety, to deal with stress. And that has been one of the most special things about the fiber arts to me, right, was that it allowed me to create artwork, but that was also a coping mechanism. And so while I was making things, while I was focused on creating these products, I found that the time and the process piece really was what I enjoyed the most. So it would be very frustrating to be a perfectionist and try to get the perfect toast all the time. And the more that I embraced the idea of creating as a way of meditation or getting myself almost reset, I really found that it was very healing and very therapeutic to approach creating and making art in this way. And so when I would reach out and I would talk to people and learn more about what people enjoyed about the creation process, I found it interesting that, like, for example, I have a Facebook group that's called Spin, Dye, and Create with Alanna Wilcox, and in there, I often give people challenges. And so it wasn't on purpose that this happened, but I basically created a challenge for myself. It was part of this Instagram challenge called the 100-Day Project, where you basically dedicate 100 days to working on the same project. And so I was going to try to get through all of my work in progress projects over the course of 100 days and trying to do it as much as I can. And so I was talking to the people in my Facebook group, and they were really inspired by this project challenge, and so they wanted to join in with me. And we were talking about, why does someone create? What makes someone finish a project, and what makes someone give up and want to move on to something else? And what I've discovered is that some of us really enjoy the planning stage and the learning stage. But once our skills get to a place where we feel like we've mastered it, it no longer becomes fun and interesting and exciting. And so trying to understand what it is about the creation process and making is really, something that I find very fascinating. But also with having ADHD, it's not that I'm distracted by other projects, but I really need it to be something that I can go full on in, fully immerse myself in. But once I've reached that level of what I feel is either mastery or, competency, then it no longer becomes fun. And that's why I want to join and jump into something else. So my Facebook group has really helped me both connect with people that experience that, but also learn how something like ADHD can really influence the way that my creation process looks like compared to someone else. So in addition to the Facebook group, I also am pretty active on Instagram. So I love to share the projects and the things that I'm working on there. So if you're on any of those social media platforms, I have videos on YouTube, and I'm on Twitter as well, where I'm sharing my artwork, my fiber artwork related to the NFTs, and all sorts of different spaces and places where you can connect with me depending upon what it is that you're interested in doing. So I do have a website. It's just my name, AlannaWilcox.com, and I invite you to reach out to me if you have any questions about the classes that I teach. So I teach ones on spinning and dyeing and creativity. I also will go to in-person events. So if you're ever at a fiber festival, or if you're part of a guild and you would like me to come and talk about color or creativity, spinning, dyeing, all of that good stuff, I'm happy to do that as well. And if you're interested in seeing some more of the things that I've created, I've also written articles for magazines like Spinoff and Ply. I have another book that I wrote on how to approach color for spinning different hand-painted tops. That's called A New Spin on Color. So that book is also one that I self-published as well. And that is the in-depth study, or the thesis, if you will, when I finished with my spinning certificate coursework. So I went on to become a master spinner. And so that was basically a 2-year endeavor. And so my book, A New Spin on Color, is what my thesis was about, or this in-depth study, which was to take the same dyed painted top and to spin it up in 20 different ways, and to show how those different approaches were going to influence the color outcome in the hand spun yarn and the finished knitted swatch, right? But I've also talked about, weaving and other color applications too, like other project applications when you're thinking about working with color. So it's a very comprehensive book that touches on all of those points. And in addition to the Facebook group, I also have workshops online that are on demand, as well as ones that I run live both through my website as well as other venues. And lastly, I do private one-on-one consultations, especially for indie dyers. So I really like to be able to help people with color palette development. So if they are working on a collection or a line of yarns that they want to have color coordinated, I do consultations for indie dyers and anyone really that's interested in having someone like me in your pocket to pick my brain about, to help you with your color, with your project, and how I would approach it. So the last takeaway that I hope you get from watching this video is that when you are creating, sometimes you might feel stuck, right? And you may not know what to do to get past that wall of not knowing how to make what it is that you have in your head. So one of the tips that I like to give to people is that we experience stress just the same way that cave people did a long time ago if a lion was chasing them, right? And so as a response to that, humans can either fight the lion, we can, run away from the lion, or we can freeze. And so especially with COVID in the past few years, life has become very stressful for many of us. And so that might have put a damper or made it difficult for you to find your creativity and your desire to create. It may have fizzled and you've become frozen. And so the best tip that I can give to you to do is to, one, recognize when do you have things in your life that are causing you stress, and how do they impact your desire to create? But also, what can you do when you notice that you're feeling, frozen and stuck because of stress? And so the biggest tip that I give to people is to go through your stash and just touch everything. You don't have to create, you don't have to, make something or finish a working project work in progress project or anything like that, but just go and touch your supplies. And I guarantee you that the act of tactilely stimulating your fingers and going to touch your supplies will get you excited again about creating, and it will reset your brain in feeling like comfortable and happy to engage with those materials again. And if you're feeling overwhelmed and stressed out, touching your tools more and getting on social media less, being on your phone less, that's a great way to kind of counteract that frozen feeling. So again, if you're interested in, having a continuation of this discussion or a conversation, I would love it if you reached out to me. And so again, you can find me on Twitter, on Instagram, on Facebook, Spinny Buns. And I have my Facebook group, so you can feel free to join there. You can visit my website. It's alannawilcox.com, and I've got workshops there, my color matching formulas, and you can connect with me there as well. So thank you so much for letting me be part of this Kings County Fiber Festival as an artist and as an educator, and I look forward to connecting with you in the future. Take care.